Do you get a pinch in the front of your hip when you squat? Your hip joint is made up of the articulation between the head of your femur, or the head of your thigh bone, and the acetabulum of the pelvis. Hip pinching can happen for many different reasons, including the bony architecture of the hip joint, the range of motion available at the hip joint, how the femur is gliding and rolling in the acetabulum, and the strength, control, timing, and coordination of all of the muscles surrounding the hip joint and the pelvis. Just because you have hip pinching doesn't mean that you need to stop squatting. There's a couple of things that you can do to modify and still gain strength in those legs around any pinching in the hip. The first thing to consider when you're getting pinching in the front of the hip with squatting is your foot and leg position. We're all born with different bone structure, different bone lengths and relationships between our femurs and our torsos. And so each of us is going to have a different looking squat than the other person. You can either take your legs out, turning them out into some external rotation, and try a couple of reps of your squat and see how that feels in the front of the hips. Or you can play with turning the feet in and having more of a parallel looking squat, or somewhere in between. So play not only with the rotation of the legs, but also the width or the stance, how far apart your feet are, or how close they are together. Along the lines with your foot and leg position and leg width is also the mobility that you have down at your ankle joints. So if you're a little bit more limited in your ability to dorsiflex the ankle where the knee travels over those toes, something like a slant board or a wedge might be beneficial for you in terms of achieving range of motion and less hip pinching in your squat. If you're squatting on an elevated surface like a slant board, it will also help you keep a little bit more of an upright torso, which could lessen those symptoms of hip pinching, as you'll have less folding of the torso on top of that flexion of the hips. If you don't have a wedge or a slant board and you're at home or at the gym, you can also grab 2 dumbbells to elevate underneath your heels, or 2 weight plates, and then you can also manipulate these wider apart or closer together if you prefer more of this turned out leg position versus more of a parallel foot position. The next thing to consider is adjusting your range of motion or your squat depth. So if you're squatting down and you're getting a pinch pretty low down at the bottom of your squat when you're in a lot of hip flexion, you might benefit from lessening that range of motion and bringing the ground a little closer to you, or squatting to a target like a stool or a box or a bench. So you can play with adjusting the depth of that squat to help you find the range that feels more comfortable for you to be in. And now over time, if you're feeling good in this new range of motion, you can start to progress to slightly lower surfaces, lower benches or boxes, and then continue to work on that control and coordination of the muscles around the hip joint and around the knees, around the ankles, as you're going down and up with less symptoms of pinch. Next thing to consider here is where you are putting the weight that you're using on your body or manipulating it in your squat. The next thing to consider here is where you're putting the weight that you're using on your body, or how you're manipulating weight in your squat. Let's pretend that this stick is a barbell, right? Some of us, if you're lifting a little bit on the heavier side and using a barbell, might prefer the barbell on the back, doing more of like a barbell back squat. That might feel better in the front of the hip. And then some of us will have the opposite, who might prefer the weight more front loaded, like in a front rack squat, again with your specific foot position and squat depth, or in something like a goblet squat, where you're holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell at the front of the body and going down and up. And if back-loaded or front-loaded squats just still don't feel good, you can also try something like a suitcase squat, where you have that weight more on the sides of your body and the sides of the hips, and then just see how that feels with your hip and pinching. And then the last thing here is to potentially modify the weight that you are squatting with temporarily, breaking it down and then building it back up. So you might start to drop that weight that you're using and squat with a slightly lighter weight just for a period of time until your symptoms decrease and you feel like you're able to go down and up with less pinching. And then progress slowly to more weight, back to heavier sets of squat. Again, choosing the depth that feels good for you and the leg position that feels good for you, and then keep continuing to progress over time. So I hope this was helpful. Just because you're having pinching in the front of the hip does not mean that you need to stop squatting. It means you need to play around with your squat and figure out what weight position, body position, foot position, type of squat works best for you in this moment. And then that might change over time. Got any additional comments or questions? Drop them down below.